Hey everyone, my name is Dr. Erik Carlson. I am the owner of My Weight Solution. I've helped hundreds of people lose thousands of pounds, and I'd love to give you some information and tools to help you do the same. So today, the video that I wanted to go over with you all is really looking at one of the main reasons why people come into and why I work with people in the first place is really trying to figure out and isolate what is the problem that we're actually trying to solve when somebody's trying to reach their weight loss goals. And this is where a lot of people start this whole journey that they go through off on the wrong foot, meaning that they're trying to solve for a problem that they don't know what the problem is, or they're trying to solve a problem that's actually already solved and that's not their core issue that's preventing them from actually reaching their goals. So there's three different types of problems that people have when it comes to reaching their goals. It typically falls under one of these three categories. So the first category is going to be that it's literally just knowledge of nutrition and food. The second one is going to be personalization of that nutrition. And the third one is going to be more of the self-sabotaging nature, self-sabotaging behavior. Another way to think about that is I know what I should be doing, but I'm not following through with it. So let's go into these in a little bit more detail here. So the first one, this concept of really understanding nutrition knowledge. I'm always amazed at how many people will come to me and they say, I eat healthy. It's not that I don't know what to eat. It's that I don't know, I keep getting in my way, or it's like I'm eating healthy and I don't know why I'm not losing the weight that I should be. One of the big misconceptions that a lot of people have when they come into this process is that they believe that because they've been eating their whole life, they also have this understanding of nutrition. And when I say that, I don't want you to think that it's a judgmental thing. It's not at all. But there's a big difference between understanding how nutrition works and this concept of knowing what is or is not healthy foods for you. That's another concept of saying that I really don't like is the concept of like healthy or unhealthy foods. A better way to look at it is this food going to help me get closer to my goal, or is this food going to take me away from my goal? But going back to this idea of the main problem being nutrition, one way to kind of figure this out, like, is this the problem for you? How much general knowledge do you have on nutrition? Are you able to differentiate, or do you know the different types of macronutrients? When I say macronutrients, do you have any idea what that means? Do you know the different types of macronutrients? When you're looking at macros, so just for those that didn't know the first part of that question there, macronutrients are going to fall under fats, proteins, and carbs. So those are the three macronutrients, right? So when we're looking at macronutrients, do you know how many calories are in 1 gram of protein, how many calories in 1 gram of fat, how many calories are in 1 gram of carbs? Or is that concept foreign to you, right? When you're looking at the breakdown of a food, are you able to say, all right, well, if I have this, this is going to generally contain more fat. This is generally going to contain more carbs. Do you have any idea as far as where that number falls into play? Are you able to, like, if I were to say, if I asked you to break down the nutrients between the macronutrients between nuts, yogurt, and chicken thighs, can you do that? What is a nut made up of? How much fat, how much protein, how much carbs? How about yogurt? What's the difference between regular yogurt and Greek yogurt, right? How about the difference between a chicken thigh and a chicken breast? They're very, very different. And so when people, like I said, come in and they're like, well, I understand nutrition, but I'm still not getting the results that I want. Most of the time it's that they really don't actually know and have a good level of understanding with nutrition. This is not a judgment factor in any way. But once again, if we're trying to solve this problem of helping somebody lose weight and they don't know the basic foundation of the building blocks of what they need to do in order to get there, it's always going to be much more challenging. So that's that first aspect of it. Is the problem actually a knowledge of nutrition and understanding kind of the basic principles of nutrition? The second aspect of it, the second problem that most people run into is more of this personalization of nutrition, right? So do you really understand what's going to work best for you? This can come in a couple different ways. So what I mean by that is one of the things that a lot of people can go through is that they might have a food sensitivity. Right? And so you can have a food sensitivity to any type of food. You may have a food sensitivity to a certain vegetable or tomatoes or anything, eggs, whatever it is, right? So oftentimes when I ask people if they know what a food sensitivity is, they'll be like, oh yeah, that's like gluten issues, right? So it's an issue with gluten. It's like, well, that can be one of them, but there literally any food that is out there, somebody could have a sensitivity to. And so the reason why this is so important is to be able to identify if there's any foods that you're eating that you're sensitive to, is because if you're eating a food that you're sensitive to, it's going to create an inflammatory response. The more inflammation you have, the more your body's going to retain water and retain body fat to manage that inflammatory response. So why is this important? Right? So maybe you have an issue with broccoli, maybe your issue is broccoli, but you keep eating broccoli because you think it's healthy for you, but it's actually making things worse. Right? And so what happens is that people may be eating these foods that they think are quote unquote healthy, but it's actually making things worse. And so we just want to make sure that there's nothing that you may be consuming or eating that is actually being a hindrance to your progress, right? And so this is the part that's always really cool, is that when we're able to figure out what foods that a person was eating in the past that was creating lots of other issues, and realize the issues, they might not just be digestion issues, right? They might not just be inflammation issues. Maybe it causes, we just had somebody the other day, she's like, I've been going on this process, and in the first 2 weeks, my skin has cleared up, and it's been the cleanest it's ever been. It's like, great. So that means that we know that one of the foods that you're eating was actually creating an inflammatory response that was causing your skin to break out. So the more that we can go through this and identify what those foods are, once again, it means that we're able to really avoid any of the things that's going to make it worse and just focus on the ones that are making things better. So that's the first part of it. The second part of it is going to be looking at more specifically what macro breakdown is going to work best for you, right? There's lots of different ways that you can lose and maintain weight out there. But there's also going to be one that works best for you. So are you someone that your body responds better to a higher fat diet? Does your body respond to a higher protein diet or a higher carb diet, right? There's no right or wrong. And this is one of the big misconceptions, that there's no right or wrong saying, well, somebody does keto and somebody does Atkins and this person's wrong and this person's right. Like, that's not the way it works. It's what's going to work best for you. What does your body respond best to? Because everybody is slightly different. So when we're looking at this testing part of it, so being able to understand, like you said, what types of macros. So do you respond better to higher fat? The other part of it is how many calories in general should you be having? And this is one of the things that's going to be based upon your activity level, right? So if you're exercising 6 days a week, you're going to need more food than somebody that's sedentary. Right? Once again, it's not a judgmental thing for the person that's sedentary. It's not a judgmental thing for the person that's working out 6 days a week, but they're different. And so depending upon where you're at, you're going to need a different amount of food and different types of foods. And there's going to be different types of foods that you want to avoid. So this is another big problem when we're looking at being able to really not only get to your goal weight, but also be able to reach your goal weight. One of the challenges when we're looking at this personalization side of it is looking at the testing component specifically. You can do this in a free way, or you can do this in a paid way. Neither one of them, once again, is right or wrong, but each of them come with a cost, right? So if you're doing it the free way, the thing that's going to cost you the most is your time. Because if you are looking at individual foods and you're testing individual foods, you can only test one food at a time, right? And so if you're testing gluten, that means basically what you're going to do for that process is you're going to eliminate gluten for 2 to 3 weeks. And then when that time period's up, you're going to reintroduce that food. And when you see what happens when you reintroduce that food, then you can say, all right, well, this is something where I felt like garbage after I ate it, or I felt fine. And it's not an issue. Okay, great. You checked one thing off the list, right? Now you've got 50 to 100 more different foods that you'll want to look at testing. Right? So if we're looking at that time frame, like that's going to take 3 years to do it. Now, like I said, it's free, no right or wrong with it, but that's the cost when you're looking at it, doing it from that side of things. Same premise when we're looking at testing the macros, right? So when you're testing the macro side of it, are you someone that should be a high fat diet? Well, you're going to have to test out that diet for 1 to 2 months before you're going to be able to recognize, all right, is this a diet that really works for me? Same thing. Well, maybe that one didn't work. So maybe you went from a high diet to a higher protein diet, right? So same thing. You got to test that one out for 2 to 3 months. And then you got to test when you're looking at the macros for a much longer period of time. So that's the one drawback when you're looking at the testing side of it, is that you can do pretty much all these types of analyzing this on a regular basis. it's just going to take a much longer time frame, right? So that's the other concept. The other side of it then is obviously going to be you can spend money on it, and the drawback is obviously you're spending money on it, but the time frame is going to be much less, right? Usually you take the test, send it off, comes back to the lab. It might be 2 to 4 weeks turnaround time, right? So, and you're going to have all your information ready to go right there. The other side of this, when we're looking at the problem or the challenge with personalizing it, is going to be work schedules and timing, right? And so, what I mean by that is, are you somebody that tends to do a lot of like overnight shifts? Are you somebody that doesn't have a break during the day, or as soon as you get home from work, you've got to go and take the kids immediately to work to soccer practice or to some type of sporting event? So the timing of it also plays a big factor. So that's the second one. So that's a lot of information, right? We're 2 out of the 3 way there. The third one is going to be more of the self-sabotaging problem. And this is really coming down to the idea of, I know what I should be doing. I have a really good plan to get there, but I'm not following through with it, right? And so there's multiple different ways where the self-sabotaging behavior can show up, right? So one of them is going to be having unrealistic expectations, right? I'm on a weight loss program. I'm 40 pounds overweight, and I expect that 40 pounds to be gone in 4 weeks. And if it's not gone in 4 weeks, I'm not going to stick with it long term. And that seems unrealistic when I say it that way, but there's definitely people that come in with that type of attitude and be like, that's not going to happen unless you start cutting off limbs, right? And I don't think that's the approach that you want to take with it. So making sure that we're setting realistic expectations. That's the first one of 7 different ways where the self-sabotaging behavior can show itself up. Next one is really going through this process, having an all or nothing approach, right? Meaning like I have to be 100% all in. I have to follow this 100% perfectly. And if I don't do it, I'm a failure. And if I fail one time, then I've failed all the times going after that, and it's not worth it, right? So that's a big one that a lot of people go through. Next one is going to be stress eating. This is another super common one where people will address the challenges that they're facing, whether it's an emotional stress, a physical stress, and trying to address that stress by eating. That's a codependent type of mechanism where people are looking for a sense of love and connection, and they're not getting it in their day-to-day life. And so they're associating that sense of love and connection to a sense of eating food, and they've got this uncorrect linkage of those two things. So you've got an emotional state and the food that you're eating that are linked together when they really don't have anything to do with each other. Next one, as far as self-sabotaging behaviors, is actually not accurately tracking food intake. So this kind of goes back to one of the other things that I was talking about before when we were looking at nutrition knowledge. If somebody comes up to me and says, I have a really good understanding of nutrition, I know exactly what foods are good, what foods are bad. If I ask them like, okay, great. So when you track your food, how many calories are you consuming? And then they kind of look at me in like a blank stare. And if they've never tracked their food, it's like, okay, well, we know that there's a big disconnect there, right? But one of the other problems when you're looking at tracking your food is actually being honest with yourself. If you walk by, so just to give you kind of an example, right? So let's say you've got a jar of nuts at your house and you walk by that jar, let's say, just make the math simple, right? 10 times a day. And every time you walk by that jar of nuts, you grab just a small, not even a full size handful, just like a half size handful. You do that 10 times. Now you've added an extra 800, 600 calories to your day. And if you're not putting that information in there, well, there's a reason why you're not reaching the progress that you're making, because you're not accurately tracking the actual amount of food that you're consuming. Oftentimes that will happen as a result of somebody saying, well, that's just a small little piece. It doesn't really matter. And the problem is that you have multiple small little pieces that add up to a big number. Another aspect of it, and this was one that it's always interesting when I talk to people about this one, because they always get a good laugh at it. But it's a challenge when they're going through it, right? It's this idea of rewarding good behavior with bad behavior. So for instance, this is where someone will come in and be like, yeah, I did a really good job for 3 days. And the next day I felt like I deserved to have a day off. And so I binged or maybe not even binged, but I just kind of ate whatever I wanted to. It's like, well, so the thought process with it that we're taking people through is like, so what you're saying is that by doing something good, you now deserve something that's going to make your problem worse. And it's, when you start to think about it, it's kind of ironic and frustrating, but also a little, I don't want to say comical, but it's more like the irony, right? It's like, I feel that by doing a really good job, I'm going to intentionally take a step back. Next one is going to be comparing yourself to others. So one of the biggest problems that a lot of people do as well is that they compare themselves to the progress of somebody else. You are not the same person. And this is one of the things that we were talking about before, is that everybody responds to food and to losing weight differently. Now there's general guidelines that because everybody is still human that we're looking at, but when we're looking at the difference between each individual person, things are very different. And so when they're going through those different aspects of it, if you are comparing yourself to somebody else's progress, you're not the same person. Especially when you're looking at comparing men to women, very, very different with regards to weight loss. And so that's one of the biggest areas where this high level of frustration can occur when people are trying to compare themselves to somebody else. You don't know the different things that they're going through. You don't know the things that they're doing when they're not around you. You don't know the foods that you're eating. You don't know the choices that they're making when they're with you versus when they're not, right? And so to compare yourself to somebody else is another really good way to kind of set yourself up for failure. And that's one of the more self-sabotaging approaches as well. And then the last one is going to be giving in to social situations or social settings. And this comes down to the kind of this idea of feeling like you have to fit in with other people. Instead of valuing yourself and your health and your goals and your values and putting them first. And this is a core human concern, right? Like we as a species are very social creatures, and one of the biggest concerns is social embarrassment, because then the concern is that that could lead to social isolation. Nobody wants to be isolated. We are a social species. And so oftentimes there's this belief where if I am not doing and fitting in and doing the things that all of my social circle is doing, or my immediate family circle is doing, then I'm going to be an outcast, and I don't want to be an outcast. So it's more important that I fit in than I focus on the goals that are important to me. And so all of these different aspects of self-sabotage plays a huge role when people are getting in their own way. And so when we're looking at trying to identify what is the biggest problem, oftentimes it's a mixture of these three, right? So maybe it's a little bit of nutrition, it's a little bit of personalization, it's a little bit of self-sabotage. Sometimes it's just going to be one. It's like, I'm super dedicated and committed, I'm going to follow through, and I can follow through, I just don't know what to do. And so when we're looking at you reaching your goals, the first step in you being able to reach the goals that you have is being honest with which one of these three problems is the thing that's holding you back the most. Because once you're able to identify what the biggest problem is, it gives you a much better avenue to say, well, this is actually the thing that I need to work on, instead of just jumping from program to program to program and saying, well, now I'm going to do this, when this thing over here maybe doesn't have anything to do with the actual problem that you're running into. And so this all comes from being honest with where you're at. And so hopefully you guys got some really good information with this. If you've got any questions, please feel free to shoot me a question through here. And like I said, I just want you guys everyone to be able to just start going through this process of really analyzing and figuring out what's the main thing that's holding you back. Or like I said, it could be a couple things. But by being able to identify the actual problem that needs to be solved, it's the step in the actual right direction of being able to fix the problem and get you to where you want to go and reach your goals. So once again, Dr. Erik Carlson, hope you guys got some good information from this video.